It's Mailbag Monday here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. We'll tell you our thoughts on the firing of Brant Brown and a whole lot more coming up. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Monday, June 3rd, 2024. This is Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, we're going to open up the mailbag like we do here every Monday and answer some of your Mariners questions. But before we do that, shout out to our title sponsor today, SupplyHouse. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to get parts fast. Shop for your next plumbing, h-vac, or electrical job and get fast shipping from coast to coast at SupplyHouse.com. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. The link is in the description, and you can sign up for a free 7-day trial. All right, let's kick off Mailbag Monday here with Lance, who wants to know, do you see Jorge Polanco or Mitch Garver being used strictly as payroll offsets and trade packages, or do they stick with them and hope they regress back to their career norms?
Yeah, you probably could put them in a deal to kind of offset some payroll. But the issue with that is that if you want to do that, it's going to cost you more prospect capital to make up that difference. Teams that sell, typically they're not looking to add payroll. They're actually, a big part of the reason they sell is to clear payroll. Well, the baseball people want to get those prospects and get something for the player before he just leaves in free agency or whatever. And they can kind of start to reset their build on these trades. Another reason to do it is that they want to clear some payroll space, right? Because if you're going to, pay $100 million for a 72-win team, why not just pay $75 million for a 68-win team? What's the difference? To fans, nothing. To ownership, $25 million. So it's always a little difficult to say, like, just add the salary here and offset it here. But there's one thing we know about Jerry and Justin is that, unfortunately, because they've had to, they're pretty good at clearing payroll, getting creative and clearing payroll space when they need it. Again, for unfortunate reasons, but so it's easier said than done. It's one of those things where it's like, cool, that would be great. But if you get rid of like Polanco's contract, for example, the other team's still giving you an asset because they're giving you that payroll flexibility. So you still have to pay for that asset that they're giving you, which means, sometimes it could be something as like small as, hey, instead of, small is relative, but like Ben Williamson, you have to give us Tyler Locklear now. Or it could be something like, hey, instead of Tyler Locklear, you have to give us Lazaro Montez or Johnny Farmello or somebody like that. So
it could also just be you add on another prospect.
Right. And it's usually a pretty good one. Like, especially if you're talking about Polanco, by the time you'd be able to trade him would probably be talking, I don't know, $5 to $7 million left on his contract. Like, that's not going to be a
team is
prospect.
Yeah, so a team is paying $5 to $7 million to buy that prospect, essentially.
Right, and so it's not going to be some 27-year-old reliever in Double-A, right? It's going to be a little bit more expensive. So, could they do it? Sure. And like I said, Jerry and Justin have proven that they will certainly get creative and they'll add contracts and they'll swap contracts around to make the payroll work. So they absolutely could do it. Is it likely? I don't think so. I think you're better off just holding on to those guys and see if you can get them back to their, anywhere near what they've done in their entire career. And, that doesn't mean that they just get all the at-bats that you thought you were going to give them. No, they still have to earn those things, but right. It's just about, do I want to give up, for example, just hypothetically, do you want to give up Laz Montez for no reason, or do you want to just take a shot on these guys playing 2 or 3 times a week to see if they can get it figured out over the next couple months? And sometimes the latter will be the better option, sometimes the former will be the better option, but it really just depends on the player that you're getting. And so, it's a tough question to answer. So, like, in theory, could they do that? Yes.
Right.
In practice, are they going to be able to do that? I don't know. It'll be tough.
I think they're certainly going to try, because at the very least, you're probably going to run out of roster spots. So it makes more sense, even if you have to eat some of the money, to try and just trade them, include them in a package. Like if you're trading with Toronto, right, you're acquiring Bo Bichette or you're acquiring Vlad Jr., right? Like, send them Polanco, send them Garver, send them Ty France, whatever, right?
Mhm.
Just to offset some of the money or just to clear that roster spot instead of just outright DFAing them.
Right.
Next question here from Doug. Doug wants to know, what do you think about adding Elias Diaz, the Rockies catcher? He'd help to give Cal Raleigh some time off without such a huge drop-off, and as a rental, shouldn't cost too much, although a team who would plan on playing him more than the M's might be more willing to part with more. Yeah, you said it right there at the end. Like, the Mariners are going to look to, if they are interested in Elias Diaz, they are going to look to add him as a backup, whereas 6 to 8 other teams are going to be looking to add him as a starter at the deadline. So in theory, they should be willing to offer the Rockies more than the Mariners would. But it really, all it comes down to is just how much do the Mariners value having that kind of player behind Cal Raleigh and the flexibility that would essentially give them.
Right. I think, we're already starting to see the Mariners answer this question a little bit because they traded Blake Hunt, which, still don't like that at all. And, in the past, they've had Tom Murphy, who's, pretty good catcher. Unfortunately, just couldn't stay healthy. So it does seem to me like they do care about the backup catcher a little bit, but they're not really acting like it this year. But we did see Mitch Garver get a start at catcher. So that to me would kind of indicate like, hey, if we think we can get to a place where we're comfortable with Garver being the backup catcher and still DHing a couple days a week and all that stuff, like, then that's what we'll do. That'll be our backup catcher plan. Because it doesn't seem like they think Sebi is the answer, which fine, whatever.
When was the last time Sebi played? Well, he did come in in the ninth in the 9-0 game, but
yeah, I think he got a start in the Houston series.
Okay.
So, he's only playing like once every 9 or 10 days. So the Mariners very clearly, I would like it if they cared a little bit more about getting Cal Raleigh a full day off, every, maybe twice every 10 days instead of once every 10 days. But it does seem like they're pretty
his last start was against the Nationals.
So
on
he
May
didn't
26th.
get a start. He didn't get a start all week. So yeah. So to me, like, I think the Mariners are hoping that Garver can catch enough that they can, DFA Sevi, hopefully sneak him through waivers, put him down in AAA, and that'll be your third catcher. I think if Seattle does trade for a backup catcher, like a legitimate upgrade at a backup catcher, it'll be because that catcher is the second player in a deal. For example, Bo Bichette and Danny Jansen, right? Or Ryan McMahon and Elias Diaz. So I think that's how they're going to get the second catcher if they do in fact go outside the org to get that second guy. But yeah, like you said, you have to pay, like, the team that is trading the asset, they don't care what your vision for that player's role is. They're going to value him for what the height of his role is, which is everyday catcher in this league. So I don't care if he's only going to play, 15 games for you guys. You still have to pay me like he's going to play 50 games for you guys. And are the Mariners going to do that? They might.
Right.
Is it likely? I'd say no.
So looking at Zavala's lack of starts and, obviously the Garver experiment, seems like the writing's on the wall here. Seems like 2 + 2 is adding up to 4 with Zavala and how they feel about him.
Right. It's an interesting situation, but yeah, I think the Mariners would like their ideal scenario in their minds would be Garver assumes the backup catcher's duty and Zavala somehow sneaks through waivers and we can stash him in AAA as our third catcher.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to answer a few more of your questions coming up here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is once again brought to you by SupplyHouse. Get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trade Master program. Every Trade Master gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Mariners kick off a 3-game set with the Athletics tomorrow night. You can catch all the action this week on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. Now, before we get into your questions, or back into your questions rather, let's talk a little bit about Victor Robles, who the Mariners are signing to the 26-man roster. They sent,
where'd you hear that from?
Yeah. A certain someone here on this podcast might have reported that earlier today on Twitter.
Adam Jude?
Yeah, even though some people in the community want you to think otherwise. This was first reported by myself. Victor Robles is signing with the Seattle Mariners. He'll be with the team in Oakland tomorrow. Jonathan Clase, of course, sent down to AAA earlier this morning, which sent Mariners Twitter into a little bit of a frenzy, like, oh my God, they're gonna make a big trade now. No, it's not time for that yet. It's not time. It's just Robles, who he might only be on the team for the next 10 or so days, depending on. I think a lot of that depends on how Ryan Bliss does over the next little while here before Jorge Polanco gets back, because they could just send down Bliss, or they could keep Bliss on the roster and release Robles and just have Dylan Moore essentially be their fifth outfielder. But you got any thoughts on the signing of Robles, kicking the tires on Robles?
My guess is that he's literally here because he's, Jonathan Clase, who doesn't need any development time.
Yeah.
So if he sits on the bench all week, then nobody cares.
I guess at that point, though, my question is, like, why not just have Cade Marlowe or Samad Taylor do that?
Yeah,
why go through the hassle of signing him,
It's really not much of a hassle. You're paying him a pro-rated league minimum.
Right.
So it's $740,000 broken down into how long he stays with the team. So could legitimately be talking about like $100,000
Sure.
being paid to this guy.
Which is a lot to John Stanton.
Sure. But is it worth $100,000 to give Clase at bats in AAA where he desperately needs them, to give Marlowe at bats, in AAA where he's struggling right now? So the answer is probably yes. I think the Mariners will be facing a lefty in this Oakland series, so I assume we'll see him there. We'll see Robles get the start against the lefty like Clase would have. And then, he's certainly a better defender than Clase. He can play all 3 outfield spots. The numbers haven't been great to him the last few years defensively, but he has been hurt. Before that, he was a premier defensive outfielder at all 3 spots, and he has one of the best arms in baseball. So defensive versatility in the outfield, still has some good speed. Has been okay against lefties in his career, and he literally costs, in the grand scheme of things, nothing. So worth a shot. Nothing to get too excited about, but it's worth a shot. It's kind of like when they brought in Justin Upton. Yeah. And like, do you remember anything from Justin Upton except for the 1 home run he hit against the Oakland A's to tie the game in the 8th before they would win it in the 9th? Yeah. And was it worth it for that 1 home run alone? Yeah, it was.
We salute Justin Upton for that.
Sure.
Mariners legend.
That. Yes. Mm-hmm. So could Victor Robles do something like that? Yes. But I would suspect that he's only going to get starts against lefties. And then he'll just be a defensive replacement because he is better defensively, certainly, than Haniger and Canzone and Dylan Moore and probably Luke Raley. Mm-hmm. So, and, he's a viable center fielder, which the Mariners might not think they have outside of Julio. So, yeah, worth a shot. And he's only 28, I think. Like, he's still pretty young. So
he's still 27. He's still 27. He just turned 27 actually a couple weeks ago. This year, or last year rather, 299, 385, 364. That was only in 36 games, and by far an outlier for his career.
2019 was his one good full season.
Yeah, but he's a guy that has experience, former top prospect, World Series champion. Mm-hmm. Just kick the tires on him, see if there's anything there, and if not, okay, you can move on.
You're not using that 26 man spot on your roster anyways, so might as well have a guy who can play some defense and run the bases a little bit on there, and doesn't need time in AAA to develop.
Right. Gregory wants to know, is Ryan Bliss just a fun little story with his speed and guts on the base pass, basically a second base Class A, or can he be more a real everyday player? I think something in between. Like, I think he can be like, I think he can have a similar impact to the one that Jose Caballero had last year. You know, walks, base running. We've already seen that a little bit here from Bliss. And there's some pop in the bat too. I think he might be able to hit a little. Just hasn't yet.
Sure. Is Gregory making a joke at the expense of the vertically challenged Ryan Bliss? Interesting. Called him
Also,
a little player.
Oh, a fun little story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch your biases there, Gregory. But watch Gregory's 5'4".
You know who else was a fun little story? Jose Altuve, Gregory.
Clearly, same guy. Dustin Pedroia. Ever heard of him? No. Like, here's the. I really like Ryan Bliss. I was there on Saturday. I watched him terrorize the Angels on the base.
Colby and I fell in love with Ryan Bliss on Saturday.
Right. But at the end of the day, he's 1 for 11. Like, he's drawn some walks. He's had some good at bats, like
4
really
walks.
good at bats. Yeah. So like, it's not like he's not competing at this level, like Jonathan Clase wasn't for the last 2 weeks.
He's also had a couple of hard hit balls that just bad luck.
Sure.
Yesterday he had the 102 to center, and then his first game he had, I think, also
Altuve.
102
Yeah.
to Altuve.
Yeah. So look, like I don't want to like dismiss Ryan Bliss's debut. He's been fine. But we have seen, again, at the end of the day, however you want to slice it, he's 1 for 11. The defense has been a little questionable at second base.
His arm is questionable for sure.
Right. Very questionable. It's why he's not a shortstop, because he can absolutely play short. He's athletic enough to play shortstop. But yeah, like he's 1 for 11. It's only been like 15 plate appearances total. So this idea that like, oh, Ryan Bliss should be the everyday second baseman, or like, oh, Bliss should keep his spot when, Polanco, let's pump the brakes on that. We might get there in the next, few weeks until Polanco gets back, but should he kind of be splitting the job so much? Like, to me, I would start him at second base all 3 games in Oakland and just kind of see what happens, because Dylan Moore clearly, like,
he's cooled off.
Yeah, that has fallen apart, like, as we all knew it would happen. But thank you for your service, Dylan Moore. So Dylan can go back to being the outfielder against lefties. Maybe we'll see what Robles does. He can start at third base for Rojas. So Moore can kind of let Moore slide back into that utility role. Just roll with Ryan Bliss for a couple days, see what happens. But I'm certainly not one of those people who's like, yeah, Ryan Bliss should be the guy for the rest of the year. And screw Jorge Polanco. It's like, Polanco's still been better than Ryan Bliss. So, I like Bliss. I like what he brings to the bases, like on the bases. I think he'll be a fine defender. I think this is just kind of, just some early hiccups from him. He's a very good athlete, and he does have tremendous power for his size. So I like Bliss plenty. Should he be on this roster when Jorge Polanco comes back? Probably not, but it kind of depends on what everybody else is doing. So I like Bliss, but yeah, I think his ceiling is, like Ty said, it's pretty much Jose Caballero this year, which was helpful last year, very helpful. So Bliss can absolutely have a role on this team. It's just, I would stop well short of being like, can he be the everyday second base? Can he be the answer at second base? Like, right now, no. Like, I think it's pretty clear the answer is no to that. Can he earn more playing time at second base? Can he stick on this roster for, longer than Polanco's IL duration? Sure, it's possible. I would say it's unlikely, but it's definitely possible. I like the guy too.
Yeah, and again, I think depending on what he does over the next week or two, however long it takes Polanco to get back, I think he's probably the guy that has the biggest impact on the future of Robles in Seattle as well. Because again, it's probably either it's him or Robles. I don't think anyone else is under consideration there.
And Bliss has got all 3 options, so
yeah.
We'll see. I would say wouldn't count on it long term. I think he can be a kind of solid everyday player. I don't think he's going to be an all-star or anything like that. I love to be proven wrong, but yeah, he's fun. He runs the bases very aggressively. He's a good athlete, and he's going to hit a ball that like people are going to be like, wait, what? Like he's going to hit a ball 400 feet to his pull side or something. And people are going to be like, wait, what? Like he has that kind of power. So the thing I've been most impressed with him right now is that strikeouts have not been an issue for him.
Nope.
So
he struck out twice, walked 4 times.
Right. They have not been an issue yet. I think they might be at some point this year, but for now he's fine.
Yeah, I still wholeheartedly disagree with putting him in against Josh Hader over Josh Rojas in that situation. But overall, he's been very impressive. He's been very impressive, especially in a couple of big spots for this team over the last few days.
He's surviving right now.
For sure. All right, we're going to answer a few more of your questions here in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. With PrizePicks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. All you have to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stat projections, and you're locked in. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. So get in on the daily action with your friends and become a part of the PrizePicks community today. Right now, you can get Jason Tatum for more than just half a point in game 1 of the finals. I mean, duh. I'm also taking Daniel Gafford more than 15.5 points, rebounds, and assists combined. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Once again, you can catch the M's and the A's this week on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. All you have to do to find that is search the word Mariners. Matthew wants to know, what are your guys' thoughts on the Brant Brown firing? So this happened like an hour after we stopped recording on Friday, so we didn't have a chance to talk about this. We talked about it a little bit on the Patreon show. We did a post-game show together yesterday. So let's talk about this a little bit more. What are your thoughts on Brown? I think everyone knows kind of what you're going to say about we don't know if it's going to have an effect, if at all. We probably never will know. But overall, what did you just think about like the fact that they did it, right? Like they actually did it.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I believe, and I've looked into this and I haven't found anything to contradict it. I believe this is the first in-season firing of a coach in the entire Scott service regime. Like they've made changes in the coaching staff, but they've always been in the winter. So surprised they did it. It's not really their MO. Scott and Brandt are good friends also. So, I know that must've been a really tough conversation for Scott to have. But I'm surprised they did it. At the end of the day, like it's a scapegoat. Like, look, and as much as people want to make it not a scapegoat or whatever, that because they want to justify firing a dude, like a dude losing his job, they want to justify it. At the end of the day, Brant Brown got fired because Jorge Polanco, Mitch Garver, Mitch Haniger, to a lesser extent, Cal Raleigh, Julio, JP, like those guys sucked. That's why Brant Brown lost his job, not because Brant Brown made them suck. So, could there be some improvements on like communications? Could there be some tweaks in the game plan that could help guys a little bit? Sure. But at the end of the day, let's not kid ourselves. Brant Brown was fired, and it's the player's fault that he was fired. So
Mitch Haniger said as much.
Right. And they should, because they may be a young ball club, but they're still a veteran ball club. And, again, if the Mariners were averaging 4.5 runs a game, nobody is talking about Brant Brown, and they certainly have the bats to do it. So, this isn't like the offensive coordinator in football where he calls plays and you can directly point to his play call and be like, this needs to get better. This needs to get better. We don't know. We do not know if Brant Brown was the problem or even a problem. So you kind of have to take the Mariners like word for this. And if the Mariners thought that it was best for them to move on,
right,
then you just kind of have to like acknowledge like, okay, well, we'll see if they're right.
Yeah.
But we won't know. We can't possibly tell you with any kind of certainty whatsoever that Brant Brown was the thing that was holding back this offense. And if you just want to look at it in just like a big picture view, it's almost impossible to fathom that one person, a hitting coach, is the sole reason why this offense has been bad. Because
well, clearly it was because Colby they scored 19 runs and only struck out 17 times over the last 3 games.
It's funny, a man lost his job. Let's make jokes. Real nice, Ty. Real nice. But yeah, it is ironic to say the least that they scored. What was it again? 19 runs.
Yeah, it was 19 runs.
19
struck
runs
out just 17 times. Yeah.
Yes, it is ironic that happened. But again, it was against the Angels, who have some of the worst pitching in baseball. So, not that that's ever stopped the Mariners from struggling before, right. But we'll see how it goes forward. Like I said, I feel bad for the dude. I know that ultimately he is a scapegoat. Doesn't mean that like he didn't maybe, like
there were other issues, right? Yeah, so
sure.
that's kind of what I wonder here, because again, like you said, this hasn't been the the MO of Jerry DiPoto and Scott Service,
right?
They've never done anything like this before, and generally speaking, they've been very patient, whether it be with player decisions or staff decisions, etc., almost to a fault.
Yeah.
So to see them do this just a few months after hiring the guy. It's I think at the very least it signals that there might be a sense of urgency within the organization. Not really in terms of performance, because again, how much does a hitting coach or an offensive coordinator actually, how much impact does that guy actually have on performance? We have no way of quantifying that really. But in terms of just like, we need to make change. We need to make essentially a statement here of some kind. Like that to me is interesting. That aspect of that is interesting to me. So we heard Aaron Goldsmith and Mike Blowers talk about this a little bit during the broadcast, and it seemed like they were kind of alluding to things that maybe they had heard from players, talking to players on the field over the last couple of days. Did seem to kind of allude to like a too many cooks situation, which I also heard on Friday after the news came out. So maybe it was just as simple as that. There was just too much information, and maybe there were conflicting philosophies on how to proceed, because obviously frustrations are starting to boil over. The offense has been terrible. How do you fix this, right? Or how do you try to fix this? And maybe there were different opinions and ideas on how to proceed with that, and not everyone aligned on that, and maybe that's what led to this. Who knows? Right. We'll never know. But it is pretty funny that the first 3 games in the post Brant Brown era, they were really good offensively for the most part. Seattle sports fan wants to know, with Wu missing a bullpen session due to quote unquote arm stuff, would it be beneficial at some point later this year to expand to a 6-man rotation? And if so, when would be a good time? If not, what would be a more effective way to manage Wu's workload so he doesn't overdo it? Colby, I know you have some thoughts on this. We actually talked about this a little bit on the Patreon show last night.
The nice thing about, the Mariners schedule coming up here is that they get the day off today. So Wu's next start will come on 6 days or 5 days rest instead of 4 days rest. And then they have a 13-game stretch. So he'll have to make he'll have to make another start in rotation. Then he'll get another day off. And the Mariners schedule actually over the next, really after they get through this next 13-game stretch, really favors the Mariners to kind of give Wu extra days off throughout the season without having to go to a 6-man rotation. They have, for example, in the month of July, they have the 4-day All-Star break off, and then they also have 2 days off in between that 4-game break. In August, they have 4 days off, and they never play more than 9 games in a row in the month of August. And then September, they actually have 3 days off. And again, they never play more than 9 games in a row. So the schedule actually sets up pretty well for them to manage Wu and maybe push him back or kind of shift their rotation plans a little bit, maybe keep Castillo on regular rest. So that way Wu gets an extra day's rest, that type of thing. So the schedule is actually going to allow them to manage Wu's, time between starts a little bit easier than it has been in his first 5 games back. But yeah, they could consider a 6-man rotation. But again, the issue with the 6-man rotation, as we've said every single time it's been brought up, is like, do you really want to give the ball to Luis Castillo less? Do you really want to give the ball to, Logan Gilbert? Less. You're trying to win the division now. The conversation shifted. You're not trying to get into a wild card spot. You're trying to win a division.
Scott's never said as much. He said we're making these decisions so we can win the AL West.
Right. So, like, do you want to give? Essentially, do you want like Luis Castillo to only make 29 starts this year instead of 32, so that you can give Emerson Hancock the ball 3 extra times? I think I would rather just send Wu down for a couple weeks if that's what you want to do, and use Hancock during that time, and then you can kind of get him to because remember, you can send a guy up and down 4 times in a year. So Wu hasn't been sent down yet, so they can send him back down if they want, and they could have Hancock come up, take his turn in the rotation, and then they can send him back down when it's Wu's turn, because you only have to stay down 10 days.
Yeah.
So they can get really creative with this. I don't think they have to use a 6-man rotation. It's not the worst idea in the world, but I think for me personally, I would rather, have the extra 2 or 3 starts from Castillo, Gilbert, and Kirby. I would rather have those guys and then just send Wu down and have Hancock takes Wu starts, instead of having Hancock take starts from, Castillo and Gilbert and Kirby. So, it's a gray area, but with the days off that are coming here really in the second half, where, Wu is going to have basically every other start of Wu will be on an extra day's rest. I don't think it's going to be that necessary. So,
yeah,
schedule could be coming into play here for Seattle. They're about to end after this 13-game stretch. They'll have played, 50 games in 53 days or whatever?
I think it was 52 and 55 days.
Right. And so after they get through this next 13-game stretch, it'll be a much more like once every 10 days or so they have a day off, and it's much easier to manage your pitching staff with that. So they could do it. I don't think they'll have to. They might take a shot at it though. So it's a little, gray area. And then obviously the health of the other 4 guys also comes into play too. So they might do it. And particularly if they are like, if we get into like September, right, and they are like 6 games over, like 6 games ahead of like Texas or whoever for first place, then they might do it for a week or 2 and just kind of try and like keep their arms fresh for the playoffs, as much as they can. So I'm not saying they absolutely wouldn't do it, but I don't think they need to, just based on how the schedule is breaking down for them after this next little 13-game stretch.
Right. The other thing too here is like, you might get to a point where you're not just playing to win the division, you're playing to win one of those first 2 seeds, so you don't have to play in the wild card.
Right.
So
that'd be great.
You're going to have to be, aggressive if you want to avoid that. And plus, like, the wild card might be pretty stacked. Last question of the day comes from Zachary. I have been surprised the number of times I've seen the Mariners and opponents play in early in the game with a runner on third and less than 2 outs. I thought the conventional wisdom was to give up a run for an out early in the game. Has this changed, or have I been wrong the whole time? I think some of it is just the way that the Mariners play games right now. Like, teams know that it's going to be tough to come by runs against this pitching staff, and for the Mariners' sake, like they know that they're having an issue with scoring runs in general. So I think it's just some of that.
Yeah, I think it's mostly that. Hey, scoring runs at T-Mobile Park is difficult, so why would we concede a run? Like, so I think it's mostly that. And obviously, since you're watching the Mariners, we know how difficult it is for the Mariners to score runs in general. So like Ty said, they don't want to give one up, because giving up 1 is like akin to a good offense giving up 2, right? It's difficult to come back if you just concede a run early, like that could be the difference in the game. So I think it's mostly that. And then I think the reason that other teams are doing that as well is because they know how difficult it is to scrape runs together off of this Mariners pitching staff, particularly in T-Mobile Park. So they don't want to fall behind. I think it's mostly just the Mariners. It'd be interested to see like data on this for across the league.
Yeah.
But I think specifically the reason we're seeing it so much is just because the Mariners know their strength and their opponent knows how difficult it is to score runs. So Seattle's not going to concede runs because they have trouble scoring them, and because the other team knows how difficult it is to score runs against Seattle. They are not going to concede a run to the Mariners because they could very easily lose 1-0.
Right.
So I think it's mostly just because of who the Mariners are and how they're playing right now.
Yeah, I watch quite a few games around the league every week, but not intently enough to pick up on if other teams are doing this as well. And obviously, I haven't looked at the data regarding that. So I don't know if it's just a league-wide thing, but I think when you just look at like stylistically the way the Mariners play right now, seems like things are adding up on that front.
Right. They've played 61 games now. 16 have been 1-run games. It's a pretty high percentage. So yeah, every single run counts against the Mariners, and if you're the Mariners, every run that you give up counts, because it's that much more unlikely that you're going to be able to get that run back. So I think in our case specifically, to me, it seems like it's just a Mariner thing because of who they are and what their opponents know they are. But yeah, I mean, maybe we could reach out to a few people and ask them if they've noticed.
Sure.
But I wouldn't be too shocked if that was the idea, because I think people are realizing how valuable runs are right now. So I wouldn't be shocked at all. They're like, hey, yeah, sure. I mean, like, I'd rather give up a hit than, give up a run. Plus, starters aren't going as deep as they used to. So like, they're not really all that concerned about like pitch counts. Not like, just lob it in there. We'll score off the starter when he's tired in the 7th. Like, you're not going to face the starter in the 7th. Yeah. So it could just be a completely different style that's being played right now because of how dominant pitching is really across the league. So good observation. Sure. But yeah, it used to be, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Common knowledge used to be like, hey, it's the 3rd inning. Like, we don't want this to become a big inning. So we'll give them 1 run if we can get an out. And that way we're only down 1-0 instead of, infield end, we give a base hit. Now it's 1-0 and they still have a guy on first.
Yeah. Usually teams are just playing straight up.
Right. Yeah.
In that situation. Yeah.
Yep. Good observation.
Yeah. So that is going to do it for our show. But before we get out of here, a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Ty Dane Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Ty Dane Gonzalez and Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.